Johnny McGonigal, how are you? I'm Bob Flounders. I know you know me. I was introducing myself to the audience. Uh, it is Tuesday after James Franklin's post-Ohio State press conference, Indiana week. I don't know if the fan base really cares about that. We can get to a little bit of news on that front. But Johnny, there are some things you can't unsee in life, my friend, and that Ohio State offense against the Buckeyes on Saturday was one of those things, man. It was pretty brutal, pretty disappointing, and I don't blame any Penn State fans that are upset.
Yeah, Bob, it was something. It was something. Just time after time after time. I mean, even on the muffed punt by Ohio State that Penn State recovers near midfield, even at that point, I just had no confidence that this offense at that point in the game would do anything with it. And sure enough, they end up punting from the same spot that they recovered the ball on that drive. I mean, it was just across the entire offense. I almost said across the board because it was not an across the board bad performance because Penn State's defense, and we'll talk about it, played out of their skin, played their tails off, as James Franklin said, and played like one of the best defenses in the country. But that's unfortunately for Penn State and Penn State fans, not what people are talking about. It's not what people were talking about on Saturday afternoon, on Sunday morning when you go ahead and kind of debrief this game. It was a really brutal offensive performance, and that's why Penn State is sitting here 6-1 and not 7-0.
Yeah, Johnny, and everyone's up in arms about the 1-9 record that James Franklin has against Ohio State. The one win being in 2016. The thing that really, really is stuck in my craw, and I'm not a Penn State fan, is, and this was easily the one Ohio State team that was most beatable in those 10 games. And I still believe that if you look at the talent on both teams, I think Penn State probably has the edge. And for them to play like this against a team that was beatable, I think it makes it the worst. I really do. You look at those 9 games that Penn State lost with him. You know, I think you could make the argument they could be 5-5 against Ohio State. They had a lead in overtime in 2014. They had double-digit leads in 17 and 18 against this team. And this game, I mean, I just feel like, this game was there for the taking, but 1-9 is the number. And I don't know if I think we've talked about it. I know I talked about it with Dave Jones. They didn't win this game. I'm not sure when. I know they're not going to play them every year, but I'm not sure when they're going to beat Ohio State again.
Yeah, I agree with you in terms of this loss being the worst of the bunch in James Franklin's tenure. You look at 2017 and 2018, both of those games by 1 point. The 4th and 5, the defensive collapses in both games.
Yeah.
They held an 11-point lead in one of the games, a 12-point lead in the other game in the fourth quarter. So those coming out of it, always, I just remember covering those games and the discourse after it. It felt like, this maybe a missed window here, but there was always like the but and the silver lining of, hey, we just won, a Big Ten title, a year or two ago. This program is on the up, and the fact that they're competing with, Ohio State so closely those 2 years after, there was always a silver lining you could pull from it. The only silver lining of this is that Penn State's defense is really good, but the overarching story is that they wasted that defensive performance against Ohio State. Penn State, just didn't get the ball, running at all on the ground, and really when they did early, they just went away from it. It was really an abject disaster by Mike Yurcich, the offensive coordinator. Drew Aller did not play well. I mean, he didn't see the field well, but then again, we're sitting there in the press box at Ohio Stadium. We get the kind of the all 22 view, and we see how few receivers are creating separation. It's not like Keandre Lambert-Smith was wide open all day and Drew couldn't hit him. There were a couple scenarios where Kyle McCord couldn't hit, Marvin Harrison Jr., and he ultimately still hit him for 11 times for 162 yards and a touchdown. So Marvin Harrison got his, like you would expect, but this entire offense it just had nothing to him. It really had nothing to him. And when you look at the third down rate, 1 of 16 on third down, and the one conversion came when basically Ohio State was playing off coverage and playing loose defense, already up 2 scores when the game was basically decided. I don't want to say there's not much more to say because there is so much more to say about this offense and where these issues lie and the root of everything. But when you're one of 16 on third down on the road against a top 5 team, you're not going to win that game.
Yeah, Johnny, how did they lose the game on third down? Let us count the ways. I mean, play calling, very much questionable. Game strategy, questionable for sure. Execution, questionable. And I hate to say it, but I'm going to say it because there's a lot of players on this offense that played meaningful roles down the stretch last year. Effort. To me, effort on third down also stood out to me. In some of those games Penn State lost, even the 2021 game out here that was 33-24, they gave it their best shot. They just weren't quite good enough. In 2019, when they lost 28-17 to Justin Fields and that group of wideouts, that defense gave it their best shot. Sean Clifford and Will Levis gave it their best shot trying to run against that defense. I did not see, there was no sense of urgency. They didn't look like they were on the same page. So, Mike Yurcich, I didn't think had one of his better games, but the position coaches, these guys did not look ready to go on offense at all.
They didn't, and you mentioned the position coaches. They have a role in this. The players have a role in this. But I really put a lot of the blame at the feet of Mike Yurcich and the identity of this offense that we didn't see at all. Like through 6 games, the identity was string together drives, use the running game, get 4 or 5 chunk yards on the ground at a time, wear a defense down, and take what the defense is giving you. And Yurcich really got away from that. I mean, how many times does he want to call a Keandre Lambert-Smith pass? Like, I just didn't understand the trick plays, the timing of it. Now, James Franklin said after the game that trick plays are one of those deals where when they work, you look brilliant, and when they don't, you don't look brilliant. Mike Yurcich, I thought he was fine in the first quarter, and I say that primarily because they were the first field goal drive. They let Nick Singleton cook. He had 3 carries for 42 yards. And then from that point forward, he had 6 carries the rest of the game, Bob. And, when you're in a 1-score game and you're in a tight game, because despite the offensive ineptitude throughout the afternoon, it was a 1-score game and a close game because of this defense and the way that they played. Yeah. When you're in a 1-score game like that and you're on the road, would it not make sense to lean on 2 of the best running backs, not only in the Big Ten, but in the country? And so James Franklin said on Tuesday during his weekly press conference that he didn't think the run-pass split was as bad as maybe he thought after the game when he said that they could have ran the ball more. Right. I push back on that a little bit because when Nick Singleton is only getting the ball 6 times in the run game after he did what he did against Ohio State's defense on that one drive, I just think that's inexcusable for an offensive coordinator and an offensive staff that spent the first half of the season establishing themselves as a grinded out kind of offense.
Yeah. Where I would spread it out around a little bit more is I look at it this way, Johnny. So Ohio State doesn't have Denzel Burke, their best corner. And that you have to find a way to get 44 blocked, right? He's the guy, if you want to get Drew comfortable, he's the guy you got to account for. Whether he rushed from the left side, which I think he did in the first half, and on the right side in the second half, he certainly rattled Drew's cage enough in this game that it surprised me. And this wide receiver group, and it's not just the fact that I don't think Keandre is a number 1 receiver. He just isn't. I mean, it was that first game was great, but he is not a true number 1. But none of these guys have taken a step forward. It's just. And so I just think that it was a problem on Saturday, but really it's been a problem the whole first half of the season. And the offensive line 44, they had to have a plan for him. I think that might have limited Mike a little bit, but I just think a lot of these offensive coaches had the whole off season essentially, Johnny, to get ready for this game. And to come out and lay that kind of an egg, how much time do you need? I don't think the talent disparity was that great, but I am definitely concerned about this wideout group. A couple of guys have just flat out vanished since the start of the season. And the guys that are on the field, if they don't get open underneath, they're not getting beat deep. And also James talked about it. These guys don't run great routes, and sometimes they're blocking on pass plays, and sometimes they're running routes on run. I just can't believe that we're in late October and these guys are not on the same page. I think it's a really, really bad sign.
It's an awful sign, and this is something that we've talked about since spring camp. I mean,
Yeah.
even really after the Rose Bowl when Devin Carter, the NC State wide receiver, committed to Penn State and then ultimately decommitted. That's when the discussion started about the wide receiver room and about what they needed to add to this group when Mitchell Tinsley and Parker Washington were no longer walking through that door. It's a reason why Taylor Stubblefield was dismissed as a wide receivers coach, because of the lack of the 5-star, the blue chip kind of talent, and really the development of the 4 stars that they've gotten over the years. The misses that they had in the transfer portal, there were a few guys that they wanted that they did not get. Who they ultimately got, Dante Cephas, the star wide receiver from Kent State, who had 1,900 yards over the last 2 seasons with the Golden Flashes. He has not translated at all. It just hasn't been there. He hasn't really gotten on the field. I think he played 3 snaps up until really the final 2 drives when they were in total catch-up mode. Malik McClain had a nice week 1, the transfer from Florida State. He had 4 catches, 58 yards, and a touchdown against West Virginia. Totally vanished since then. And then even guys like Amari Evans, who I thought would show some promise and had a promising end to spring camp. He hasn't been seen. And Keandre Lambert-Smith and Harrison Wallace. I mean, I thought that Harrison Wallace coming back from injury would add more of a boost to this passing offense than it has. And you mentioned Keandre. He had a nice week 1, a big play against West Virginia, a nice catch in the end zone against Iowa. This is nothing against him. I just think he is more of like a number 2 or number 3 receiver on a college football playoff caliber offense. A team that is putting up 40 points, not just against UMass and Delaware, but against some of the top competition in college football. And he is a good receiver, but he is not a guy who can carry an offense. That's evident. And it's not just him, right? It's really the group as a whole. It's Marcus Hagan's wide receivers coach, in his early development, developing these guys as a first-year receivers coach in this program. And so, the wide receiver group is a real cause for concern. And it's tough because, you had Caden Saunders coming out to speak to the media after the game, an Ohio native and a guy who caught a touchdown late in the game. So I think that's why he came out. But he has to answer for this group's deficiencies. Drew Aller is up there crying basically at the podium, wiping away tears, having to answer for the offensive performance and putting the blame on himself. But we don't talk to Mike Yurcich after games. And so we weren't able to ask Mike Yurcich about the offense. And Drew is basically the face of this whole thing. And so, these guys, there are guys who took accountability after this loss. Even speaking to Caden Wallace this morning, took responsibility and said everyone in the program is taking accountability and responsibility for the loss, and they got to move on. I mean, it's tough. It's tough to move on. When you have Indiana upcoming, and it's not like you have to turn your head and go play another top 25 team. This loss can linger in the back of their minds, and they can still go ahead and beat Indiana. But it's just a tough result. It really is.
Yeah, I mean, it's great that they say these things, and kudos to them for saying it. But I don't want to say the words ring hollow. But I've heard these words so many times after Ohio State games and a lot of Michigan games, and it just seems like. But then the same thing keeps happening 80% of the time, 90% of the time. So, what does it really mean when you say, we're wearing the blame hat? But it just seems to me, I don't know. The other thing that bugs me, Johnny, as we continue here on the Blue White Breakdown, is that I think you and we talked. I mean, I think everyone knew. Look, this was going to be a defensive struggle. I did not have high hopes for Penn State's offense in this game. I did not. I did believe in Ohio State's defense, which turned around the Maryland game, which kept them in it against Notre Dame when Marvin Harrison was hurt, and they were able to win a low-scoring game. I mean, I certainly knew they were for real, and I knew playing in Columbus was not going to be easy. Did not have high hopes for Penn State's offense, but they still under-delivered, and it's just it's just really an indictment on one side of the ball. It is the players, but I think it's a lot of coaches. And I really, the Rose Bowl, that win over Utah and that 5-game winning streak to close 2022, that seems to me like it's like 10 years away now. It just seems like it's so far back because this team This team has not, on that side of the ball, taken a step forward. And we really didn't really get into Singleton and Allen through 7 games. It's one of those things where I just don't know how much they're going to improve in the final couple games of the regular season. It's great that they get Indiana. It's great that they get to host Rutgers. They get to go to Maryland, which they always seem to do well at Maryland. They still got to play Michigan. They get a down Michigan State team. So it could be a pretty unsightly 10-2 season. It really could, maybe even more unsightly than last year's team that got thumped by Michigan.
Yeah, Bob, and it's one of those where we're talking so much. We spent the first 15 minutes of this podcast talking about the offense and the deficiencies and things that we knew and things that we were concerned about. At the same time, we both picked Penn State to win this game.
Yeah.
We both thought it would be low scoring and defensive struggles, and I thought the Penn State pass rush would ultimately win this game for Penn State.
Yeah.
And when Chop Robinson goes out in the first half, that hurts a lot. But even still, Adisa Isaac was living in the backfield. Zane Durant did a good job. I thought tonight that Sutton showed serious promise and flashes. But we both thought it would be a defensive struggle. But when we were picking Penn State to win, we both think that Penn State's offense would at least do enough. And I mean, they weren't even below average. And so even if they held Ohio State to 20 points. They finally the dam broke at the end of the game. When Marvin Harrison catches that drag route and gets in the end zone late in the fourth quarter. The defense can only hold on so long, and when you're not converting third downs and you're not sustaining drives, and not only does this defense have to go out and stop Ohio State and stick with Marvin Harrison Jr. All afternoon, but they got to do it a lot. When you're not sustaining drives and giving them a break and not giving them a breather. I mean, they were exhausted. They had a 4th down stand, which was great, a phenomenal play by both Jalen Reed and Zaki Wheatley to read that out and stop it before they got in the end zone. But time and time again, this Penn State defense, gifted Penn State's offense an opportunity to show up. Basically begging them, please, do something for us. You reciprocate a bit, and it just didn't happen. And so, you talk about an unsightly 10-2 upcoming. They have an opportunity against Michigan in a few weeks here. And, we haven't seen Michigan play anyone yet. Now, every team that they do play, they're beating, 52-0 or 49-7 and looks, super convincing. And J.J. McCarthy, their quarterback right now, is the Heisman favorite, the Heisman betting favorite for a reason. He's been, uber efficient so far. That game, I'm interested to see how it turns out, but I'm really interested to see where this offense goes over the next 2 weeks. And do they let Drew Aller cook a little bit more and let him, play out of structure and, just give him more to do? Because so far to this point, it's been check down, check down, check down. Let's not throw deep, take what the defense gives you. But clearly that will work against Illinois and against Northwestern and UMass and even West Virginia and Iowa. That didn't work against Ohio State, and it's not going to work against Michigan either, unless you get a couple of defensive touchdowns, which Penn State almost had in this game. An unfortunate defensive holding penalty, which looking back on it looked like the right call. A matter of a second or two with that flag being thrown and Kyle McCord losing the ball thanks to Curtis Jacobs' hustle play there. But sometimes those games can be determined, by 1 or 2 plays. But if you're a Penn State fan, you say, "Oh, if only we had that, we would have won." I don't know, because the offense wasn't scoring any points for you. So a tough pill to swallow.
John, let me ask you this. So James Franklin, I think, was asked right off the bat by Rich Scarcella about the team's identity on offense, and and what kind of happened. Did they get away from it in the Ohio State game? James had I thought the answer was good. He talked about, but he went into great length about what he thinks the identity is and what it will probably continue to be, and that is, play great defense, be very, very efficient on offense, capitalize in short yardage situations, whether it's 3rd down or even 4th down. Time of possession is your friend. If the quarterback is going to try and play mistake-free football in terms of turnovers, which he has through 7 games, all of that kind of makes sense. My question to you is, though, as you and I watch the Ohio State game unfold, I was kind of taken by how upset Drew was after the game. Genuine emotion, a young kid who really, that was really his first experience that just was nasty, right? He has never really been in that position. nowhere to run, nowhere to hide, right? I just thought one thing that stuck out to me with the offense is I think there were a handful of times, whether or not James Franklin made a note of it or not. I thought there were a couple of times in that game, whether it would have been a scramble or whether it would have been, instead of giving the ball to one of the running backs, keep the ball and skirt around right in. I thought he had room to run maybe 4 or 5 times, and it doesn't sound like much, but when you're that bad on third down and the defense is getting more and more dejected by the possession, I think, it only takes 1 or 2 of those plays to kind of maybe get Ohio State thinking how to defend differently if they got to honor that. I guess what I'm saying, Johnny, is I do think now, after watching this game, I do think that James Franklin and Mike Yurcich have to find a way to incorporate Bo Prabula into the offense. I'm not saying give him a whole quarter, but I'm saying he's legitimately a running threat, and he is a better running threat than Drew in short yardage. I'm just wondering why they would hold off now on maybe not folding him into the short yardage package, because I think that is their identity. I think that's how they're going to have to win. If they play Michigan tough, they're going to have to be way better in short yardage, and he could be a part of that, because I do think he's quick enough, but he's also tough enough where he can make some plays. And if it's 3rd and 3, he can run it twice and probably get a first down. What are your thoughts on maybe just him? It's not the Will Levis role from 2020, the COVID year, but do they need to think about using him?
Yeah, I think they need to think about using him, and I think he does bring obviously a different dimension to this offense, a different skill set. We've seen it in whether that's garbage time or primarily garbage time, but even when they leave the first team offense out there with him for a series or 2 in a game, he's shown that. My only thing is with people calling for Bo, and again I get it, and seeing Drew on a read option, just, have the entire right side of the field to him, and he just doesn't keep it. That's something he needs to do. He needs to keep it once or twice to keep a defense honest, if that's the play call. The only thing is, with the identity and the short third downs and all that, they just didn't have short third downs in this game. I mean, the average distance to go on third down for this team was 7.5 yards. So when you're facing, 3rd and 7 or 3rd and 8 or 3rd and 9, they had some 3rd and 15 sprinkled in there. As much as maybe use Bo on earlier downs just to shorten that a little bit for you and get your offense to be in a more flexible spot in a 3rd and 3, say. And when those opportunities do present themselves on 3rd and short, yeah, I do think he can bring a different element and, to keep moving the chains and all that. But I think a lot of the early, 1st and 2nd down passes, when you've got Nick Singleton in the backfield there, you've got Katron Allen, who's his MO is getting hard yards and running through people. You're setting your offense up for failure when you're, putting them in 3rd and 8s and 3rd and 9s. And that's the play calling for me. And so there are different, it's not just one thing, right? There's several different things that go into this. The blocking needs to be better. They could use the tight ends more. We saw on one drive, or one of the second field goal drive, that Theo Johnson had a 34-yard catch. And right before that, Tyler Warren had a 12-yard gain that he lowered his shoulder on and got a first down. And then those guys were nowhere to be seen at all. I think Theo actually ended up having a handful of targets in this game, but really just not, it just didn't connect, right? And so I think using the tight ends more, both in the running game and the passing game. You mentioned JT Tuimoloau, out number 44 earlier. He went up against Caden Wallace on the right side in the first half. In the second half, he was pretty much exclusively on Olu, or at least had a handful of snaps against Olu. I thought JT and Olu, both, they kind of traded snaps in terms of reps, who won and who didn't. But JT came up big down the stretch when Penn State wasn't obvious passing situations. I just think this offense just has a lot of warts right now, warts that we knew about, and it's going to be a tough fix. This is not something this is an offense and an identity that you build over the course of months, from spring camp over in the summer, August training camp, and then throughout the first half of the season. I just don't think you go ahead and flip something on its head and can really change something as we're approaching November here, Bob. And it might be is what it is, which is unfortunate for this defense. A defense that could be the best in the country right now.
Yeah, I guess, Johnny, we should probably stop belaboring this point about the Ohio State. Let's just move it forward here for a minute or two. I know you asked James about Chop Robinson. That was a scary sight on the field when he went down. We still don't know. We have a pretty good idea what probably happened, but we're not doctors. You did ask him about Chop. Why don't you give an update on Chop? But also, was there anything else maybe that stuck out to you about what James was asked about?
Yeah, I mean, primarily, I thought that the big thing coming from the press conference was, yeah, there was a lot of Ohio State talk, but Chop Robinson specifically, someone that we didn't get to ask James after the game about, because the press conference I think was about 9 minutes long, and there were so many other things we had to ask. But Chop Robinson, who went down in the second quarter, ultimately had to be carted off the field. They might have gone to commercial break, but he was down on his stomach, and then it took him a while to get him onto his back, and then ultimately on his feet, walking off the field with a trainer and Theo Johnson after what seemed like a helmet-to-helmet collision with an offensive lineman for Ohio State. James, who does not speak about injuries for the most part unless they are season-ending, he said that he does not expect this to be a season-ending injury, which is great news for obviously Chop Robinson, but also Penn State's pass rush. James said, from what I understand and what I see and what I know, I don't see this being a long-term issue. What the issue is specifically, again, you mentioned it, we're not doctors, we don't know. And James wouldn't tell us anyway. So it's one of those where it's seemingly week by week. Will he play this weekend against Indiana? We don't know. If he doesn't, it's going to be Adisa Isaac and Deni Dennis Sutton off the edges for both, starting roles. And then, Mina Vanover also got hurt in the Ohio State game. We're not sure of his status, but Zariah Fisher, maybe Jamil Lyons ends up burning his red shirt as a true freshman. There's something to keep an eye on here as Penn State prepares to play Indiana and then at Maryland before the Michigan game.
Yeah, and I just, I know that the fans are not going to be super excited about what they see Saturday against the Hoosiers that are 2-5, and they've just gotten smoked in Big Ten play. It's a program that is, that 2020 story was really nice with Michael Penix in there, who's now a Heisman candidate at Washington, but they've just regressed badly. It's a tough place to try and win in the Big Ten, especially in the Big Ten East, right? So whatever happens on Saturday, I would take it. I would say you got to take it with a grain of salt. I just am going to be really curious to see a couple things. I just wanted to touch on one thing that I think can be a positive. Not so. I mean, it will be a positive against Indiana, but other than one play, I thought Penn State's special teams were pretty good against Ohio State. Falcons made 2 kicks. I think they were 40 and 41 yards. They were, when he made them, they were big kicks. Riley Thompson, I thought, did a great job hemming in Ohio State's offense with his punting. I think he averaged 44 yards on 9 punts, but they were backed up quite a bit. Daquan Hardy at punt returner did have a nice 15-yard return. He did I don't know that he made a mistake because he talked about it afterwards in case Penn State fans are wondering what the heck happened. But Penn State had a chance in the second half to get the ball around midfield. They had pinned Ohio State pretty deep, and the wind caught the ball, according to Daquan Hardy. Instead of catching it, he let it drop. I think it ended up going 72 yards back to the 24. That was kind of a huge play in the game. I do think, though, moving forward, him as a punt returner and just a specialist, I didn't feel bad about special teams, Johnny, but I feel a lot better about special teams, and that could come up. That could come into play against Maryland, right? Because that's a big game, and also against Michigan. So instead of them being just solely about defense at this stage, I think their kicking game has gotten better, and I think that's 2 facets of the game they can hang their hat on. Johnny, the question's going to be just what should be the expectation for this offense, not Saturday, but in 2 weeks at Maryland, and then the game against Michigan, and can they do anything to kind of help those other 2 parts of the game?
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned Riley Thompson, FAU punter transfer, and Alex Felkins, the walk-on transfer kicker from Columbia. Those were the 2 biggest impact, preseason transfers that Penn State got, which good for those guys. But again, talking about the offense, I think it's pretty damning, the fact that you don't have Dante Cephas really out there. You don't have Malik McClain out there. Trey Potts, who had been a spark, for this offense, and we gave him his flowers earlier in the season, but he within that role, you don't really expect him to come in and take over reps for Nick or Katron. And if he did, he probably wouldn't have gotten the ball anyway because they just weren't running the ball.
Yeah.
Just one more point I want to hammer home about this defense. About the defense. I wrote it on Sunday. Looking back at the game and rewatching it. I mentioned the pass rush and Zaki and Jalen's play on the goal line, but I thought Kalen King didn't have his best stuff, but again, you're going to get beat by Marvin Harrison Jr. There are going to be NFL corners that got beat by him for years to come.
Yeah.
But I thought Johnny Dixon played really well. I thought he hung with Marvin. He had a corner sack earlier in the game. The linebackers, Abdul Carter and Curtis Jacobs, each had 9 tackles. Again, not only did Ohio State only score 20 points, they were only 6 of 16 on third down, which isn't great by Ohio State standards. I think their running backs averaged 2.5 yards a carry, and Ohio State ran the ball 33 times with the running backs to keep Penn State's defense honest, at least. But I thought this defense just Manny Diaz and this group, Dion Barnes and everyone on that staff and everyone in that position room, player-wise, coach-wise. Yeah. I just thought it was a really good game plan overall. I thought they did their job, and it's a shame that they didn't get rewarded with a win. But this unit is going to continue to carry this team and not only eat alive, the Indianas and the Rutgers, even though Rutgers bowl eligible. I think if they're going to beat Michigan, it's going to be the defense. It's going to have to do it, and so we'll see in a few weeks what this defense can really do again for the offense. Which I don't want to be too doom and gloom, but I just don't see where the massive improvement is going to come. Maybe they shock me. Yeah, they surprised me in a bad way on Saturday.
Yeah, it doesn't. I don't think it has to be massive, Johnny. Honestly, it was so poor. I just think if they can get back to, if they can be 25% better than what we saw in Columbus at home, I think that's a lot. And what I would just add to what your thoughts on the defense, 1,000% agree. I hope they just realize there were so many NFL scouts at that game that even though they have to live with the L, a lot of pro personnel people, a lot of scouts now know just how good this Penn State defense is. And I think the guys that really delivered for the defense, I think they're going to be rewarded in the future. And if nothing else, if I was them, I'd be happy about that, because I think that is something they can build upon, and they're going to get 2 more opportunities to show what they can do at Maryland and against Michigan. And I just think that there is still a lot of football ahead for this football program, but it really does become, the question becomes, Johnny, what can Penn State do offensively to help this one of the best defenses in the last 25 years at Penn State? Because they kind of just hung them out to dry. And I think if you're an offensive player at Penn State, you really kind of have to look yourself in the mirror. And I think the coaching staff on the offensive side does as well.
Yeah, and just to put kind of a bow on this, it's a lot of negative towards the offense, which is understandable. This team is 6-1. They've got a lot of football ahead of them. Caden Wallace talked about that on Tuesday. Drew Aller, when he was wiping his tears, I felt so. I really did feel bad for him. Like I asked him how he felt he played, and he just said sucked. And he put so much of the blame on himself. And I do think that he has a bright future, and he's going to turn it around and play better against Ohio State, next year, and possibly even Michigan this year if he gets some help. But the season isn't over. And, Drew said that the last time he felt the way he did after Saturday's game was when, his high school team in Medina, Ohio, lost in the state playoffs his senior year because the season was over. The flip side is the season isn't over. And so they've got time to sort this out. They've got Indiana upcoming. Maryland at Maryland will be a test. We saw Maryland hung with Ohio State for a minute. And they've got Michigan, and they have to, the players and coaches have to look at these games as opportunities, especially the Michigan game. And so, there are opportunities ahead. Let's put it that way. There is understandable doom, gloom, and frustration, and questions and disappointment from this Ohio State game, but the season isn't over, and we'll see what they got over the next 5 games, Bob.
All right, Johnny, I'm going to let you go. It's Tuesday. I won't say anything else, but I know you have a busy Tuesday night scheduled. I'm not going to say anything else. And I hope that your Tuesday night goes 180 degrees differently than Penn State's Saturday afternoon in Columbus. How about if I just say that to you?
Go Phils.
All right, then.